James Sullivan, a 28-year-old white American tech mogul, had built an empire worth $500 million from the solitude of his Manhattan penthouse. His pale skin, often untouched by sunlight, seemed to glow faintly under the blue light of computer screens that were his constant companions. At 28, he had never known the warmth of a lover's touch, nor the courage to meet a woman's gaze without his heart racing. Social anxiety had woven a cage around him, one he reinforced with code and algorithms, where human connection was a variable he couldn't control. His world was sterile glass walls, minimalist furniture, and a view of Central Park that felt more like a painting than a place he could belong. His parents, Margaret and Robert Sullivan, had other plans. While James was consumed with a software launch, they orchestrated a surrogacy contract to secure an heir for the Sullivan fortune. They were abroad expanding their business empire in Europe, leaving James to face the consequences of their decision alone. The contract, printed in cold clinical font, sat on his mahogany desk, Surrogate Services Agreement, for the express purpose of producing an heir. It was a business transaction, as impersonal as a stock trade, yet it shivered through James's lean frame. The chime of his private elevator pierced the silence of his penthouse, a sound as jarring as a system crash. James froze in his home office, surrounded by screens displaying lines of code that had always been his refuge. His fingers, usually steady on a keyboard, trembled as he reached for his coffee mug, only for it to slip and shatter on the marble floor. The crash echoed his unraveling composure. "Damn," he muttered, his voice rough from weeks of video conference calls. His brilliant team ran his company seamlessly, but his isolation had deepened since his parents' departure. The elevator chimed again, followed by the soft click of heels on marble. Feminine steps, light and deliberate, crossed his foyer. His concierge had strict instructions to announce visitors, but the contract included override codes for this moment. "Mr. Sullivan." The voice was warm like sunlight breaking through clouds, with a hint of nervousness that tugged at something deep in James's chest. "I'm Nia Carter. I believe your parents arranged for me to come." Nia Carter, 26. A Black American graduate student, stood in his foyer, like a vision from a world James had never dared to enter. Her dark skin glowed under the soft lighting, her natural curls framing a face with high cheekbones and expressive brown eyes that held strength and uncertainty. She wore a simple green dress that hugged her curves, her presence vibrant against the sterile backdrop of his home. Nia's life in Detroit, raised by a single mother who instilled pride in her African-American heritage, had shaped her resilience. She was here not by choice, but by necessity. Her mother's stage 3 breast cancer demanded funds she couldn't otherwise provide. James pressed himself against the wall, his heart hammering. His therapist had warned him this day would come when his parents would tire of his excuses and force change. He hadn't expected it to feel like this, like the world was tilting beneath him. "Mr. Sullivan." Nia called again, her voice closer now, carrying a mix of determination and vulnerability. "This is awkward, but I drove from Brooklyn in a storm. Maybe we could talk." James caught his first full glimpse of her through a crack in his office door. She set a small purse on his glass coffee table, her movements graceful yet deliberate. "Your parents said you're private," she said, gently glancing around the empty living room. "I'm not here to judge or push you. I want to understand what we're doing here." Her honesty hit James like a physical blow. She wasn't here for ambition or gain, but for survival. Her mother's life depended on the contract's payout. If you're watching this story unfold, comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from. Nia's voice seemed to echo in James's mind, as if she were speaking to an audience beyond the room. It's always more fun when we share the journey. And if you're hooked, give us a like. It keeps the story going. James took a shaky breath, his reflection in the window revealing a disheveled man, tousled dark hair, a wrinkled MIT t-shirt, and jeans that hadn't been washed in weeks. He looked like what he was, a reclusive millionaire who'd forgotten how to live. "Miss Carter," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper as he stepped into the doorway, gripping the frame like a lifeline. Nia turned, her face lighting up with relief and warmth. "Please call me Nia." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Not the contract obligation, but a spark of recognition. Her brown eyes held no pity, only curiosity and kindness. "This is terrifying." James admitted, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Nia's smile softened the room's edges. "For both of us," she agreed. "Let's figure it out over coffee. Your kitchen looks untouched, like it is waiting for someone to bring it to life." James felt his lips twitch a rare, almost smile. "I mostly order takeout," he confessed. "Perfect," Nia said, moving toward the kitchen with easy confidence. "I love a challenge. Please tell me what you like to eat, and I'll work with whatever's in there. If you're enjoying this moment as much as I'm trying to make it work, hit that subscribe button. We've got a lot more story to share." As Nia opened his pristine refrigerator, pulling out ingredients James had forgotten he owned, he realized his carefully controlled world was shifting. With her vibrant energy and quiet strength, this Black American woman wasn't just here to fulfill a contract. She was here to challenge everything he thought he knew about himself. And as she hummed softly, filling his sterile kitchen with life, James felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't dared to name hope. The morning after Nia's arrival, James woke to the scent of coffee drifting through his penthouse, a foreign intrusion in a space that usually smelled of nothing but air conditioning and electronics. He lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying their dinner from the previous night. Nia had transformed his barren kitchen into a stage, her laughter filling the silence, as she crafted a simple pasta dish from forgotten ingredients. Her questions about his software projects had drawn him out, coaxing hesitant responses about algorithms and innovation. Yet every time her hand brushed his, James's pulse spiked, his body caught between wanting to lean in and fleeing to his office. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across his minimalist library. James stood outside the doorway, clutching a tablet like a shield, watching Nia curled up in his favorite leather armchair. She was engrossed in a worn copy of Toni Morrison's Beloved, her fingers tracing the pages with reverence. Her casual jeans and cream sweater made her look at home, as if she belonged in this space he'd kept so guarded. The sight stirred something in him, curiosity, longing, fear. "You can come in," Nia said, without looking up, a smile playing at her lips. "I don't bite." James's face warmed, embarrassment prickling his skin. "I didn't want to interrupt," he mumbled, stepping into the room, his sanctuary of books and solitude. The shelves towered with volumes he'd read and reread, from Austen to Asimov, each a refuge from the world he couldn't navigate. "You're not interrupting," Nia assured, setting the book down. Her eyes met his, warm and inviting. "This library is incredible. Most people with collections like this show them off. You've read them." James admitted that all of them were moving closer, despite the knot in his chest, some multiple times. Nia's face lit up. "Even Morrison Beloved is my dissertation focus. The way she weaves history and trauma, it's like she's speaking directly to the soul." James hesitated, then nodded. "It's haunting. The way Setha's choices ripple through time, it's like debugging code. One error and everything shifts." He regretted the analogy instantly, expecting boredom. But Nia leaned forward, eyes bright with interest. "That's exactly it," she said. "Her characters are like systems under pressure, revealing truths when they break." "What's your take on Paul D's role?" For the next hour, they debated Beloved with an intensity that made James forget his nervousness. Nia's insights were sharp, and her passion for literature was infectious. She challenged his interpretations, pushing him to see the novel through her own experiences. Her mother's stories of resilience, her Detroit roots, where community was both strength and struggle. James spoke freely, his usual stammer replaced by a quiet confidence born of her encouragement. Their conversation shifted to the contract, a shadow neither could ignore. Nia set her book aside, her expression turning serious. "We need to talk about this arrangement," she said, her voice steady but vulnerable. "I'm here because my mother's treatment costs more than I'll ever earn as a grad student. But I need you to know I'm not some hired professional. I answered your parents' ad because I had no other choice." James's throat tightened. The contract's clinical term, surrogate services, air production, felt like a violation in her presence. "I didn't ask for this either," he said, his voice low. "My parents. They think I need an heir to secure their legacy. I've been too focused on work to argue." Nia nodded, her eyes searching his. "But it's not just business. We're people, James. This contract asks us to create a life together, even if it's just on paper. That's not nothing." Her words hit him like a revelation. He'd seen the contract as a parental mandate, another task to manage. But Nia's honesty forced him to confront its weight, the ethical grayness of hiring someone in need, the human cost of their arrangement. He admitted, "I don't know how to do this," his hands clenching the tablet. I don't know how to be close to anyone." Nia's smile was gentle, not pitying. "We don't have to rush. Let's start by talking like this and getting to know each other. I'm not here to force anything you're not ready for." Her agency, her choice to set boundaries. Despite her desperation, shifted something in James. She wasn't just a pawn in his parents' game. She was choosing to navigate this with dignity. "Tell me about your mother," he said, surprising himself. Nia's face softened. "She's a retired teacher, fierce and stubborn. Raised me alone after my dad left. She'd read me Maya Angelou at bedtime and taught me to see strength in struggle. Now she's fighting cancer, and I'm fighting for her." Her voice wavered, but she held his gaze. "That's why I'm here, James. Not for your money, but for her life." The honesty in her words dismantled his defenses. He wanted to tell her he understood loss not of a person, but of connection of years spent hiding behind screens. Instead, he said, "She sounds incredible like you." Nia laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Flattery won't get you out of telling me about yourself." He didn't know what came next, but for the first time he wanted to find out. James stood in his penthouse office, staring at lines of code that blurred into meaningless patterns. For 3 days, Nia's presence had disrupted his routine, her laughter and warmth seeping into the sterile corners of his life. Their literary debates had become a daily ritual, each conversation peeling back layers of his guarded heart. But this morning, Nia had a new challenge. "You can't live your entire life behind these walls," she announced, standing in his doorway with her hands on her hips, determination blazing in her eyes. "When's the last time you felt real sunlight?" James glanced up from his laptop, where he'd been dodging a video call with his CTO. "I take vitamin D supplements," he said, his voice weak against her resolve. "UV rays are harmful." Nia's laugh was bright, unyielding. "Supplements aren't the same as chaos noise and life's beautiful mess. We're going to Central Park. Get dressed." Her yellow sundress swayed as she moved closer, the fabric catching the light like a promise of something alive. James's pulse quickened, not just from her proximity, but from the audacity of her plan. Parks meant people, variables he couldn't control. Yet her confidence made resistance feel futile. 20 minutes later, James found himself walking down Fifth Avenue, Nia's hand tucked into the crook of his elbow. The city assaulted his senses, horns blaring the tang of hot dog carts, mixing with exhaust pedestrians weaving like unpredictable code. His shoulders tensed, but Nia's steady presence anchored him. See, the world didn't end, she teased, eyes scanning the vibrant street. Back in Detroit, I'd spend summer days at community festivals, music, food, people everywhere. It's messy, but it's alive. James envied her ease, the way she embraced the crowd's energy. He admitted, I don't do well with mess, dodging a skateboarder, too many unknowns. That's the point, Nia said, squeezing his arm. Life's not a program you can debug. You've got to feel it. She pointed to a vendor selling ice cream, her face lighting up. Oh, I haven't had a cone like that in years. Want one? Before James could protest. Sugar dairy. Questionable hygiene. Nia ordered 2 vanilla cones. Her enthusiasm infectious. She handed him one, her fingers brushing his, sending a jolt through his nerves. Thank you, he mumbled, staring at the melting dessert, unsure how to proceed. Nia had no such hesitation. She took a slow lick, her eyes closing in bliss. Perfect, she sighed, catching a drip with her tongue. James nearly dropped his cone, heat rushing through him at the innocent sensuality of the moment. He tried to mimic her, but his hands shook the ice cream, smearing his fingers. You okay? Nia asked, noticing his struggle, her voice soft and concerned. Just not used to this. James managed his throat tight. He focused on the cone, avoiding her gaze. But her warm, not mocking laughter eased the tension in his chest. They found a bench by the lake, the park buzzing with joggers, families, and street musicians. Nia shared stories of her childhood dancing at block parties, her mother's voice singing gospel hymns, the pride of her community's resilience. Detroit's not perfect, she said, her eyes distant, but it taught me to find joy in the chaos. What about you? What's Boston like for you? James hesitated, his cone melting, forgotten in his hand. Quiet. I grew up in a big house, just my parents and my expectations. I'd escape into books or music, anything to avoid their world of galas and handshakes. He glanced at her, expecting judgment, but found only curiosity. Sounds lonely, Nia said softly. But you're here now with me. That's something. Before he could respond, dark clouds gathered, and the sky unleashed a sudden downpour. Parkgoers scattered, but Nia grabbed his hand, laughing like a child. This way, she shouted, pulling him toward a small pavilion 50 yards away. They ran through the rain, her fingers laced with his, her joy contagious. By the time they reached shelter, they were soaked. Nia's dress clinging to her curves, her curls dripping. She looked wild, radiant, like a force of nature. That was amazing, Nia exclaimed, wringing water from her hair. I love summer storms. They remind me of home, when we'd dance in the rain until my mom dragged us inside. James couldn't stop staring. The wet fabric outlined her body, and her unself-conscious laughter made his chest ache with want. You're different, he said, the words clumsy, but honest. Nia's eyes softened, catching his gaze. So are you, she whispered, stepping closer. The air between them charged, her breath visible in the cool rain. For a moment, James thought she might kiss him. Her lips parted, her body swaying toward his heart-pounded desire warring with panic. What if he got it wrong? What if he couldn't match her fire? We should go back, he stammered, stepping away, his voice unsteady. You'll get cold. Disappointment flickered across Nia's face, but she masked it with a nod. You're probably right, she said, her tone light, but tinged with hurt. The walk back to his building was quiet. the rain a soft curtain between them. James kept his distance in the elevator, not trusting himself to stay composed if she got too close. Nia's gaze lingered on him, a mix of confusion and patience. She excused herself to change in the penthouse, leaving James alone with his thoughts. He'd wanted to kiss her, to bridge the gap between them, but his fear had won again. As he stood in his office staring at the city below, James realized Nia was more than a disruption. She was a challenge to everything he'd built to keep himself safe. Her stories of Detroit, her ease in the world's chaos, her willingness to meet him where he stood, were pulling him towards something he'd never dared to want, a life beyond his screens. James woke to a sound that didn't belong in his penthouse, a harsh, painful cough echoing from the kitchen. Nia's presence had warmed his sterile home for over a week, her humming as she cooked the soft rustle of book pages in his library, and their debates over literature that stretched into the night. But this sound was different, raw and alarming, cutting through the morning stillness. He pulled on a t-shirt and jeans, his heart clenching as he followed the noise. Nia doubled over the sink in the kitchen, her body shaking with each violent cough. She wore simple white cotton pajamas, her usual grace replaced by unsteady movements. Her curls were mussed, her skin flushed unnaturally bright against the morning light filtering through the windows. "Nia," James said, approaching cautiously, his voice tight with worry. "Are you okay?" She turned, and the sight of her glassy eyes and fevered cheeks hit him like a punch. "I'm fine," she whispered, but another coughing fit seized her, leaving her gasping. The lie was blatant even to someone as socially inexperienced as James. "You're burning up," he said, stepping closer. Without thinking, he pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. The contact was electric, not the usual spark of attraction, but a surge of protectiveness steadied his trembling hands. Her skin was scorching, confirming a severe fever. "You need to be in bed," he said firmly, surprised by his authority. "I was going to make breakfast," Nia protested weakly, swaying on her feet. James caught her as her knees buckled, his hands finding her waist through the thin cotton. She felt fragile, and a fierce need to shield her surged through him, unlike anything he'd known. "The only thing you're making is yourself sicker," he said, guiding her toward the guest bedroom. "Come on." Nia leaned into his support, her head resting against his shoulder as they moved down the hall. The trust in her gesture tightened his throat. He helped her settle under the covers in her room, his movements careful, almost reverent. When she shivered, despite the fever, he tucked the blankets around her, his fingers brushing her neck. "I'll be right back," he promised, the act of leaving her side feeling like a physical ache. James had never cared for anyone. His parents had always hired nurses for his childhood illnesses, their emotional distance a constant. But now, instinct took over. He returned with a thermometer, water, and a fever reducer from his medicine cabinet. Nia's temperature read 102.3 degrees Celsius, high enough to spike his concern. "We should call a doctor," he said, reaching for his phone. "No," Nia said, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. "I can't afford emergency bills. It's just the flu. I'll be fine." Her voice was weak but resolute, and her fear of debt reminded her of the contract that brought her here. James's chest ached. He could cover any medical cost without blinking, but her pride stopped him from insisting. "Okay," he said softly, "but you're not doing this alone." He settled into a chair by her bed, his laptop open to monitor work remotely, but his focus was on her breathing, shallow and uneven. As the day wore on, Nia drifted in and out of sleep, her fever making her restless. James cooked a simple chicken soup, following an online recipe with obsessive precision. He sat beside her when she woke enough to eat, spooning broth between her lips. Her grateful smile, faint but genuine, made his heart clench. After a few spoonfuls, she whispered, "You don't have to do this. I want to." James replied, his voice fierce and convictional. "I need to." In the quiet of the evening, Nia's fever spiked, and she grew delirious, mumbling about her mother, her unfinished dissertation, and the contract she feared failing. James wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, his touch gentle. "Tell me about her," he said, hoping to ground her. "Your mother, what's she like?" Nia's eyes fluttered open, hazy, but focused on him. "She's everything. It taught me to love stories and to find strength in them. She'd read Zora Neale Hurston to me. Their eyes were watching God and said it showed what it means to be free and to choose your path." Her voice cracked. "I'm scared I'll lose her, James. And now, what if I can't do this for her?" "You're doing enough," he said, stroking the cloth along her temples. "You're stronger than you know." He picked up a copy of Hurston's novel from her bedside, reading softly, his voice steady despite exhaustion. The words, rich with resilience and love, seemed to calm her, her breathing easing. As night deepened, Nia's hand found his, her grip weak but seeking. "Don't leave," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I'm here," James said, intertwining their fingers. The contact, once terrifying, felt like a lifeline. He sat through the night watching her sleep, her curls damp against the pillow. The contract, the money, the expectations, they faded. All that mattered was Nia, her vulnerability, and the trust she placed in him. By morning, her fever broke her eyes clearer as she woke to find him still there. "You stayed," she said, her voice soft with wonder. "I promised I would." James replied, their hands still joined. Her thumb traced gentle circles across his knuckles, a gesture as intimate as a confession. "Thank you," Nia whispered, shifting to make room on the bed. "You must be exhausted. Sit with me." James hesitated, then settled beside her, their shoulders touching through the blankets. They sat silently, the morning light casting a warm glow over them. "I was scared," Nia admitted quietly, "not just of being sick, but of what this means for us, my mom. This contract. It's so much pressure." "I know," James said, his voice raw. "But you're not alone in it. Not anymore." Nia's smile was faint, but discernible. "You're not what I expected, James Sullivan." He met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. "Neither are you," he said, and for the first time he believed he could be more than his fears. Nia's illness had cracked open something new between them, a bond forged in care, not obligation, and a trust that felt like the beginning of something unstoppable. James should have sensed trouble when Ethan Caldwell's knock echoed through his penthouse on a quiet Thursday evening. His business partner, a self-made entrepreneur with a knack for closing million-dollar deals, never visited unannounced. Their meetings were confined to boardrooms or encrypted video calls, and Ethan's charm was reserved for clients and investors. Yet he stood in the foyer impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, his easy smile masking a sharpness that set James on edge. "Surprise visit," Ethan announced, brushing past James with his usual confidence. "I was finalizing the Patterson deal nearby and wanted to check on the hermit." "You've been dodging my calls, Sullivan." His tone was light, but his eyes scanned the penthouse, catching details James wished he could hide. James stiffened his fingers, tightening around the tablet he held. "Been busy," he muttered, his voice clipped. Ethan's presence felt like an intrusion, a reminder of the world James avoided. Before he could steer Ethan toward the door, Nia appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing one of James's oversized MIT t-shirts over leggings, her curls pulled into a messy bun. She looked effortlessly at home, her presence softening the sterile space. But Ethan's gaze shifted from casual curiosity to something predatory. "Well, well," Ethan drawled, his voice smooth as silk. "James, you didn't mention you had company." His eyes lingered on Nia, taking in the way the t-shirt hinted at her curves, his smile turning calculated. "Nia, this is Ethan Caldwell, my business partner," James said, stepping closer to her, his tone stiff. "Ethan, this is Nia." Nia extended her hand with a warm smile. "Nice to meet you, Ethan. James has mentioned your work on the latest merger." Her politeness was genuine, but James caught the subtle tension in her posture, as if she sensed Ethan's intensity. Ethan held her hand a moment too long, his thumb grazing her knuckles. "The pleasure's mine," he said, his gaze traveling over her with unabashed appreciation. "What brings someone as vibrant as you to James's fortress of solitude?" James's fists clenched, a dark, unfamiliar fury rising in his chest. Ethan's charm, honed through years of navigating elite circles, was a weapon James couldn't match. He said, "Nia's staying here temporarily," his voice colder than intended. "She's helping with the project." "Helping, huh?" Ethan's smirk suggested he saw through the vague explanation. "I'm sure she's more than capable." "Care to join us for coffee, Nia? I'd love to hear about your work. I was making some." Nia said, her tone diplomatic, as she moved toward the kitchen. Ethan followed his gaze, fixed on her with an intensity that made James's vision blur with rage. Trailing behind James, watched Ethan deploy his charm, amusing stories about their tech ventures, compliments on Nia's intelligence, and questions about her studies that drew her into animated discussion about literature and cultural history. For an hour, James endured the torture of watching Ethan flirt with Nia. Ethan was everything James wasn't: socially adept, effortlessly charismatic, able to make conversation flow like a well-written script. He leaned closer, as Nia laughed at a joke, his hand brushing her arm as he passed her a mug. Nia seemed to enjoy the exchange. Her responses were lively and her eyes were bright. James sat rigid in his chair, the contract's weight pressing. What could Nia see in a recluse like him when Ethan offered ease, confidence, a life unburdened by their arrangement? Ethan suggested we should do dinner sometime. As the evening wound down, his tone casual but pointed. "There's a spot in Soho that is intimate and perfect for getting to know each other. You and me, Nia, if James is too buried in code." James's control snapped. He said, "She doesn't need a tour guide," standing abruptly, his voice sharp. "And you have better things to do than play host to my guest." The silence was deafening. Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised by the outburst, while Nia's eyes widened, her expression unreadable. "Right," Ethan said slowly, his smile unwavering. "Well, Nia, it was a pleasure. James, we'll talk soon." He left with a nod, leaving the penthouse charged with tension. Nia crossed her arms, studying James. "That was rude," she said, her voice calm but firm. "James replied that he was flirting with you." His words rough with emotion he couldn't contain. "Ethan collects people like trophies. You'd just be another." "And what am I to you?" Nia asked, her question cutting through the air like a blade. "A contract, a guest, or something else?" James stared at her, his mouth dry. She was more than the contract, more than anything he'd dared to want, but the words tangled in his throat. "I don't know," he whispered, the honesty raw. "But I can't stand the thought of him near you." Nia's expression softened, and she quickly crossed the room, her hands framing his face. "I wanted you to feel something," she admitted, her cheeks flushing. "When Ethan flirted, I let it happen, hoping it'd push you to say what you felt. Because I'm falling for you, James. It's scaring me too." Her confession shattered his defenses. He said it stopped being about the contract days ago. his voice breaking. I'm falling for you, Nia. I don't know how to do this, but I don't want to lose you. Nia rose on her tiptoes, her lips inches from his. Then, don't, she whispered. James cupped her face, his fear dissolving as he kissed her. The kiss was fire and certainty, her lips soft and yielding, his hands tangling in her curls. He felt like he could face the world when she sighed into his mouth. When they parted breathless, Nia's eyes shone with something more profound than the contract could ever hold. She said, "We're in this together," her hand resting on his chest. James nodded, his heart racing, but steady. Ethan's visit had ignited a spark not of doubt, but of clarity. Nia wasn't just a means to an end. She was the beginning of something real, something worth fighting for. The morning after their first kiss, James woke with his heart racing, the memory of Nia's lips against his, replaying like a melody he couldn't shake. Her confession warmth and the way she'd melted into him had changed everything. He found her in the kitchen, wearing one of his button-down shirts, her legs bare, stirring coffee with a smile that chased away his doubts. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft, as she approached, no trace of the careful distance they'd once kept. "Morning," James murmured, cupping her face for a gentle kiss, marveling at how natural it felt. Her eyes sparkled with happiness, and he wondered how he'd ever lived without this. "I have an idea." Nia said, her arms sliding around his waist. "A proper date like normal couples do. There's an art exhibition at the Met today. Black artists reimagining classical themes. It's perfect for us. Innovation meets tradition." James hesitated. The Metropolitan Museum meant crowd strangers and the kind of chaos that usually spiraled his anxiety. But Nia's hopeful gaze made him want to be brave. "I'd like that," he said, surprised by his conviction. "Let's make it official." That afternoon, James did something he'd never done. He called a car service, stepping away from his screens to face the world with Nia. As they rode through Manhattan's traffic, her hand warm in his, the city felt less daunting, its noise softened by her presence. The museum buzzed with visitors, their voices a hum that made James's shoulders tense, but Nia's arm linked through his grounded him. They wandered through galleries, Nia's excitement infectious as she led him from piece to piece. She paused before a massive canvas depicting a modern black Venus rising from urban waters, her form radiant against a backdrop of city lights. "Look at this," Nia said, her voice alive with passion. The artist blends classical beauty with social commentary. Those gold threads in her hair symbolize resilience, like my mom's stories about our ancestors' strength. James studied the painting, captivated by its artistry and Nia's insight. "It's powerful," he said, moving closer, his chest brushing her back. "The way it reclaims beauty on its terms, it's like your dissertation finding truth in the margins." Nia leaned into him, her warmth easing his tension. "Exactly. Art like this speaks to who we are, where we've been. It's why I want to teach, to help others see themselves in these stories." Her words carried a weight, a reminder of the worlds separating them. She navigated this space easily, her identity woven into her love for art, while James, in his privileged isolation, had never faced such questions of belonging. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his breath grazing her ear. "You see that brushwork?" she asked, pointing to delicate strokes. "It's deliberate, like it's holding history in every line." James hummed, more focused on her scent, floral, warm, intoxicating. When she shivered at his closeness, he tightened his hands on her waist, holding her as they moved through the gallery. The crowd faded, their connection a quiet dance amid the chaos. Nia's hand rested on his chest when she made a point, her soft gasps at his whispered observations, building a tension that was all desire, no fear. As they stepped outside into the golden late afternoon light, Nia turned to him. "That was incredible," she said, her eyes bright. "Thank you for coming with me." "Thank you for showing me," James replied. "I've been to museums, but never like this through your eyes." They walked through Central Park, the sunset casting long shadows. Other couples strolled nearby, and for the first time, James felt he belonged among them. They found a bench by the lake, and Nia asked, "What's your favorite part of building software?" He considered the question, feeling intimate. The moment it all clicks, he said, "You wrestle with a problem for days, and then the solution appears elegant, unexpected, like magic." "Like art," Nia said, understanding instantly. "For me, it's how literature makes you feel seen. A line that captures what you couldn't know, like someone's walked your path before." "You make me feel seen," James said, the confession slipping out. His hand found her cheek, tracing the curve of her smile. Nia's expression softened. "You make me feel brave," she replied. "I can be myself, even in a world that doesn't always welcome me." Her words hinted at her challenges, the weight of moving through spaces like James's, elite exclusive, often blind to her reality. He stood extending his hand. "Trust me," he said, leading her to his building's rooftop. He'd arranged a dinner, candles flickering in glass hurricanes, a table scattered with rose petals, her favorite wine chilling. The city sparkled below like a constellation. Nia breathed, her eyes wide. "This is beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," he said, the words natural now. They ate, their conversation flowing like music, laughter, mingling with the distant sounds of a wedding reception below. When a slow song drifted up, James extended his hand. "Dance with me," here Nia asked, but she rose, stepping into his arms. They swayed in the candlelight, her head on his shoulder, their bodies fitting perfectly. James had never danced before, but with Nia, it felt effortless. "This is perfect," she murmured against his neck. He spun her gently, pulling her back to laugh at his clumsy steps. When the song ended, he framed her face in the starlight. "I'm going to kiss you now," he whispered. "And I'm not stopping because I'm scared." "Good," Nia said, meeting him halfway. The kiss was deep, confident, and full of promise. As they held each other under the stars, James knew this was no longer about a contract, but a future he was ready to build with her. James spent the day orchestrating perfection, but by evening, his hands trembled so badly, he could barely light the candles. 3 weeks had passed since their first kiss. 3 weeks of stolen moments, soft touches in the kitchen, whispered confessions in the library, Nia's laughter filling his penthouse with life. Each day brought them closer, their bond deepening through shared stories and quiet evenings. But the final step, which would complete their love, loomed like a cliff edge. Despite the fear in his chest, James was determined to cross it tonight. He'd transformed the penthouse terrace into a scene from a dream. White candles flickered in glass hurricanes, their glow dancing against the Manhattan skyline. Rose petals scattered across a small dining table caught the light like fallen stars, and a string quartet's melody drifted from speakers he'd discreetly installed. The air held the crisp edge of early autumn, mingling with the scent of Nia's favorite wine, chilling in a silver bucket. James checked his watch, nerves making his pulse race. Nia was getting ready, giving him time to arrange dinner takeout from a Michelin-starred restaurant, artfully plated on fine china, to mask his culinary shortcomings. Nia's voice came from behind, soft and awestruck. He turned, and his breath caught. She stood in the doorway, wearing a midnight blue dress that clung to her curves before flowing to her ankles, the fabric shimmering like starlight. Her curls were swept up, exposing the graceful curve of her neck, and her eyes held a warmth that steadied his racing heart. "This is incredible," she said, her gaze sweeping the terrace, taking in the candles, the petals, the care he'd poured into every detail. "You're incredible," James replied, his voice rough with emotion. The words felt inadequate, but true. He took her hands, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. No longer a trigger for panic, but a tether to something real. Nia smiled, rising on her tiptoes to kiss his lips. "I already know how much I mean to you," she said gently. "But show me anyway." Dinner was a blur of soft conversation and lingering glances. James barely tasted the exquisite food, too distracted by the way candlelight played across Nia's skin, the curve of her smile, the way her eyes promised things that made his blood hum. Every laugh, every brush of her fingers against his, built a tension that was no longer about fear, but about want. "You're staring," Nia teased, her voice low as they finished eating. "I can't help it." James admitted, his honesty raw. "I keep thinking this is a dream. I'll wake up and you'll be gone." Nia stood, moving to his side, her hands resting on his shoulders. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her certainty grounding him. "I'm right where I want to be." James rose, his arms circling her waist, pulling her close. Their kiss was fierce, all the passion he'd held back pouring into it. Nia melted against him, her soft sigh making him dizzy. "Nia." He breathed, his hands tangling in her curls. "I want this. I want you." "I know," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. "I want you too." Her words snapped his restraint. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to his bedroom, her laughter soft against his neck. The reality of her in his arms, willing, wanting, surpassed every fantasy he'd ever had. James set her beside the bed in his bedroom, his hands trembling as they framed her face. "I've never," he started, then stopped, embarrassment flooding him. His inexperience felt like a wall, but Nia's gaze was steady, devoid of judgment. "I know," she said, her hands covering his. "We'll go slow, together." Her acceptance unraveled him. He kissed her with desperate gratitude, pouring his fear and desire into the contact. When Nia's fingers moved to his shirt buttons, he held his breath, letting her undress him with gentle care. "You're beautiful," she whispered, her hands tracing his chest and his arms' lean lines. Under her touch, James felt transformed, no longer just functional, but desired. When it was his turn, his fingers shook as he lowered the zipper of her dress. The fabric fell, revealing her skin glowing like warm honey in the candlelight. She was perfect curves, softness, strength, and his mouth went dry with awe. "Touch me," Nia said, guiding his hands to her waist, her shoulders teaching him with patience. Her soft gasps as he explored, tentative at first, then bolder, told him what she liked. When he kissed her neck, she arched against him. When his hands traced her spine, she trembled. They moved to the bed, skin against skin, hearts beating in sync. James had imagined this moment, but nothing prepared him for the reality of Nia, her warmth, trust, and the way she welcomed him. "Are you okay?" she asked, when he paused, his body trembling with the effort of control. "More than okay," he breathed, his voice thick. "I love you so much, but it scares me." "Don't be scared," Nia said, stroking his face, grounding him. "This is beautiful. We're beautiful." When they joined, the intensity overwhelmed him. Nia was warm and perfect, her body accepting him with a sweetness that brought tears to his eyes. They moved slowly, learning each other's rhythms, her sighs and his whispers, building something greater than either could have imagined alone. "Like this?" James asked, his voice strained as he sought to give her everything. "Perfect." Nia breathed, her legs wrapping around him, pulling him closer. "You're perfect." Her words undid him. He buried his face in her neck, breathing her in as they moved together, every touch a revelation. This was what he'd feared and thought he could never have: love connection, a joining that transcended the contract. When Nia's breath grew ragged, her fingers digging into his shoulders, calling his name, James felt his control shatter. They climbed together, their bodies and hearts in sync, until pleasure overwhelmed them both. Afterwards, they lay tangled in the candlelight, their breathing slowing. James held Nia against his chest, stroking her hair, still amazed she'd chosen him. He began, words failing him. Perfect. Nia finished, lifting her head to smile. You were brave. You trusted me. How could I not? He said, his arms tightening around her. You make me want to be everything I never thought I could be. As they drifted toward sleep, their bodies entwined, James knew this moment had changed him. The contract was a distant memory. Nia was his reality, future, and love. The morning sun filtered through the penthouse windows, casting a warm glow over James and Nia. As they lingered in bed, their laughter soft after another night of whispered confessions and tender touches. The past 3 weeks had been a revelation. Each kiss, each shared moment in the kitchen or library had woven their lives closer, making the contract feel like a distant artifact. But the chime of the private elevator sliced through their peace like a warning. James froze his arm around Nia's waist as footsteps echoed in the foyer. Evan, darling. His mother's cultured voice, sharp with authority, cut through the air, followed by the click of heels on marble. We're home early. Panic surged through James. His parents, Margaret and Robert Sullivan, weren't back from Europe for months. Nia sat up, her eyes wide with alarm. Are you expecting them? She whispered, clutching the sheet. No. James said, his mind racing. They couldn't see Nia here, not like this. Not after everything they'd built. Get dressed. I'll handle them. He pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, his hands shaking as he ran fingers through his hair, trying to erase the evidence of their intimacy. Stepping into the hallway, he met his parents' assessing gazes. Margaret, silver-haired and poised in a designer suit, exuded the control of a seasoned matriarch. In a tailored blazer, Robert carried the shrewd calm of a businessman cataloging weaknesses. Mother, Father, James said, forcing his voice steady. You're back early. The Brussels conference ended ahead of schedule. Robert replied, his eyes noting James's disheveled state. We heard reports about your situation. James's stomach twisted. I've been working on a new project, he said, deflecting. The lie felt thin, but he clung to it, desperate to shield Nia. How wonderful, Margaret said, her smile cold. And how is the arrangement with Miss Carter progressing? Is she proving satisfactory? The clinical tone made James's skin crawl. Before he could respond, Nia appeared, dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, her curls tamed, but her lips still bearing the faint flush of their mourning. She moved with grace, but tension stiffened her shoulders. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, she said, extending her hand. I'm Nia Carter. It's a pleasure to meet you. Margaret's handshake was brief, her smile arctic. Indeed. How has your stay been? My dear, wonderful Nia, replied her voice steady despite the chill in the air. James has been very kind. I'm sure, Robert said, his tone laced with implication. Let's discuss the arrangement. It's a significant business matter after all. James's blood ran cold. That's not necessary, he said, his voice harder than intended. We're managing fine. Nonsense. Margaret cut in, her words sharp. This is too important to leave to chance. The contract was clear: 6 months, no emotional entanglements. We're concerned those boundaries have blurred. Nia's face remained composed, but James saw her hands tremble. With respect, she said, I'm here to fulfill the contract, But I'm not a transaction. I have my reasons. My mother's health, my future. I've been honest with James about that. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Honesty is admirable, but desperation can cloud intentions. You answered our ad because you needed money. It's only natural to leverage affection to secure your position. The accusation hit like a slap. Nia's shoulders stiffened, her dignity under attack. I'm not leveraging anything. She said, her voice low but firm. I care about James because of who he is, not what he has. If you knew him, you'd see how much he's worth beyond your fortune. James's heart swelled at her defense, but doubt flickered in his mind, planted by his parents' words. Was her care genuine or a survival tactic? Enough, he said, stepping between them. Nia's not manipulating me. Are you sure? Robert asked, his tone gentle but cutting. You've lived in isolation, James. You have no experience to judge her motives. She's in a desperate situation, medical bills, no resources. It's easy to mistake gratitude for love. Nia's eyes glistened, her composure cracking. You don't know me, she said, her voice trembling. I answered your ad to save my mother. Yes. But what I feel for James is real. If you can't see that, that's your failing, not ours. Margaret's smile was pitying. Feelings can be convenient, Miss Carter. We're protecting our son from a mistake that could cost him everything. James's fists clenched, but the poison of doubt seeped in. He looked at Nia, her face pale with hurt, and for a terrible moment he saw her through his parents' lens. A woman with every reason to secure his affection. That's not true, he said, but his voice wavered, betraying his uncertainty. Nia's gaze met his, searching, then dimmed with pain. You don't believe me, she whispered. Before he could respond, she turned to Margaret and Robert. I won't stay where I'm not trusted. To James, she added, I thought we were building something real. I was wrong. Nia, wait. James called, but she was already moving toward the guest room, her spine straight despite the tears in her eyes. He started after her, but Robert's hand on his arm stopped him. Let her go, his father said. If her feelings were real, she'd fight to stay. James pulled free, but the damage was done. His parents' words had cracked the foundation he and Nia had built. By the time he reached her room, she was packing, her movements swift and deliberate. Nia, please, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't mean to doubt you. She paused, her hands gripping a book. You did, though, she said, her voice raw. And I can't stay to prove myself to people who see me as a gold digger. I deserve better, James. So do you. She left her bag slung over her shoulder, leaving James in the empty room, with the scent of her perfume and a hollow ache in his chest. His parents had won, but at what cost? The woman he loved was gone, and the doubt they'd sown felt like a betrayal of everything he'd begun to believe in. The days after Nia's departure bled into a haze of regret for James. Once alive with her laughter, his penthouse felt like a tomb, each room echoing with memories of their shared moments. The library debates, the rooftop dance, the warmth of her touch. He threw himself into work coding until his eyes burned, but the millions he earned meant nothing without her. His parents' satisfaction, their praise for his renewed focus, only deepened his anger. They believed they'd saved him from a mistake, but James knew they'd cost him the only thing that mattered. He couldn't let Nia go. Hiring the best private investigators money could buy, he searched for her, but she'd vanished. Her bank accounts closed, her Brooklyn apartment abandoned, her university enrollment paused. She was living off the grid, a ghost driven by the hurt he'd caused. The guilt gnawed at him, a constant reminder of the moment he'd let doubt poison their love. James confronted his parents in their opulent townhouse 3 weeks into his search. He strode into their study, where they pored over quarterly reports, their calm indifference fueling his resolve. I'm done with your arrangement, he said, his voice steady. The contract, your expectations. It's over. Margaret's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. James, what are you talking about? I'm talking about love, he replied, his conviction unshakable. I love Nia not because of your contract, but because she's shown me what it means to live. I let you make me doubt her, and I'll spend my life fixing that mistake. Robert's eyes narrowed. Son, you're being emotional. She played her role well, but she didn't play anything. James cut in, his voice sharp. She loved me, and I failed her. He moved to his father's safe, entering the combination he'd memorized years ago. Inside, beneath legal documents, lay the surrogacy contract. He tore it to pieces, the paper scattering across the rug like ashes. This is what I think of your control. You're throwing away everything, Margaret said, her voice tight. You could have anyone, James. I want her, he said, heading for the door. And I'm going to find her. The breakthrough came from an investigator's call at midnight. She's in Millbrook, the voice said, working at Miller's Diner on Route 44, living cash only in a rented room. James was in his car before the call ended, the 2-hour drive through rural darkness, a blur of hope and dread. Had Nia moved on? Did she hate him for his doubt? Millbrook was a sleepy town, its neon-lit diner a beacon against the night. James saw Nia moving between tables through the window, her grace intact despite a new weariness in her posture. She wore a simple uniform, her curls tied back, and her interactions with customers were polite but guarded. His heart ached at the change, knowing he'd contributed to her pain. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, drawing every eye in the diner. Small-town curiosity hung heavy, but James focused only on Nia. She froze by a corner booth, her face cycling through shock, hope, and fear. Nia. He said her name, a plea on his lips. She set down a coffee pot, her hands trembling. You shouldn't be here, she said, her voice low. James said, I know about my parents stepping closer, despite the stares, their accusations, their threats. I had nothing to do with it, Nia. I tore up the contract. I'm here because I love you. Her eyes glistened, but she held her ground. Please, not here. She led him outside to the parking lot, where the autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves. Under a street lamp, she looked fragile, her shoulders hunched against the cold. I tried to call you, she said, her voice breaking. After I left, I wanted to fight for us. But your parents made it clear any contact would ruin my mother's treatment, my future. James's chest tightened. How is she? Your mother. She's stable, Nia said, her tone softening. A charity program covered most of the costs. I didn't need your money, James, but I needed you to trust me. I do, he said, desperation creeping in. I was wrong to doubt you. I let their poison get to me, but I know what we had was real. Nia's eyes searched his, her hands moving to her stomach in a gesture that stopped his heart. There's something you need to know, she said, taking a shaky breath. I'm pregnant. 8 weeks. The words hit like a miracle and a curse. James stared, his mind reeling. Pregnant? He repeated, his voice barely audible. Nia nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I found out 2 days ago. I've been wrestling with whether to tell you, whether it's fair to pull you back into this mess. Fair. James's voice cracked. Nia, you're carrying our child. That's everything. She stepped back, shaking her head. Your parents will say I planned this, that I'm trapping you. I can't live with that shadow, James. I won't be the woman they paint me as. You're not, he said fiercely. You're the woman I love. We can build a life together away from them, away from all of it. Nia's smile was heartbreaking. I need time, she whispered, to think about the baby, about us, about what's right. She turned toward the diner, pausing at the door. "Please don't follow me. Not yet." James stood alone in the parking lot, his heart in pieces. Nia's pregnancy was a gift, but her need for autonomy was a wall he couldn't breach. As he drove back to Manhattan, he knew finding her was only the beginning. Convincing her to trust their love again, to believe in a future free of his parents' shadow, would be the fight of his life. But he was ready to fight. James's resolve hardened with every mile back to Manhattan, the memory of Nia's tear-streaked face under the Millbrook street lamp fueling his anger. Her pregnancy, her fear, her need for time. They were all consequences of his failure to protect their love from his parents' manipulation. Once a sanctuary, the penthouse felt like a cage built by their expectations. He couldn't wait another day to sever their hold. By dawn, he was at their Upper East Side townhouse, his heart pounding with a clarity he'd never known. He found Margaret and Robert in their study, surrounded by leather-bound ledgers and the faint scent of espresso. Margaret, poised in a silk blouse, glanced up with mild surprise. Robert, adjusting his cufflinks, fixed James with a calculating stare. "James, Robert said we weren't expecting you. Is everything all right?" "No," James replied, his voice steady as steel. "It's not. I'm here to end this, your control, your interference, all of it." Margaret's eyebrow arched. "This is about Miss Carter. We warned you, darling. She's—" "Don't," James cut in. James, his tone sharp enough to silence her. "Don't say her name like it's a problem you can solve. Nia's pregnant with my child, and I love her. I'm done letting you poison that." Robert leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Pregnant? That complicates things. You realize how this looks, a desperate woman securing her future with a baby." James's fists clenched, but he held his ground. "It looks like love, something you've never understood. Nia didn't trap me. She's been fighting to keep her dignity despite your accusations, and I failed her by letting you plant doubt in my mind." Margaret set down her cup, her composure faltering. "We were protecting you, James. Your isolation, your anxiety, it makes you vulnerable. We've seen men like you taken advantage of by women who know how to play the part." "Play the part?" James's voice rose raw with fury. "Nia's not playing. She's been honest from the start about her mother's illness, her reasons for taking your contract. She refused my money when she could have taken it and run. She's stronger than either of you will ever be." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Your emotional son. But there's more you need to know. We've filed legal papers to void the contract, citing your mental state, your documented anxiety, your inexperience. Any lawyer could argue that Nia exploited you." The betrayal hit James like a physical blow. "You're trying to destroy her," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You've served her with threats, haven't you? Warning her not to contact me, to stay silent or face ruin." Margaret's face remained neutral. "We've neutralized a potential threat to our family's legacy. The media would feast on this story, a gold digger seducing a reclusive millionaire. We're protecting you, James, and our reputation." "I don't care about your reputation," James snapped. "And I won't let you hurt the woman I love to preserve it." He pulled out his phone, opening a secure app he'd coded himself. "I've transferred my assets into a trust you can't touch. Your money, your influence, it's done controlling me." Robert stood, his calm cracking. "You're throwing away everything we've built for you. For what? A woman who ran the moment things got hard. She ran because I made her feel her love wasn't enough." James said, his voice breaking. "That's on me, not her. And I'm going to fix it." He turned to leave, but Margaret's voice stopped him. "James, think about what you're doing," she said, her tone softer, almost pleading. "You're choosing a fantasy over your future." "No," he said, facing them one last time. "I'm choosing a life. Nia's shown me what it means to feel alive, to laugh, love, and face the world instead of hiding from it. You've spent your life trying to control me, but I'm done living in your cage." He walked out, their silence ringing in his ears. The weight of their expectations lifted, replaced by a fierce determination to find Nia and prove their love was worth fighting for. He called his investigator from the car, demanding updates, but the trail had gone cold again. The investigator confirmed that Nia was still in Millbrook, but she'd stopped working at the diner, her whereabouts uncertain. The pregnancy complicated everything. She was alone, possibly struggling, and James had no way to reach her. Back in his penthouse, he paced the emptiness, mocking him. Every corner held a memory. Nia's book on the coffee table, the piano keys they'd touched together, the kitchen where she'd cooked. He sat at his desk, pulling up every contact he had, determined to keep searching. His parents' legal threats loomed, but he'd fight them in court if needed. Nia and their child were his family now, not the Sullivans' legacy. James stared at the city skyline as night fell, the lights blurring through unshed tears. He'd confronted his past and severed the chains that bound him, but the future was uncertain. Nia's fear, her need for time, haunted him. Had he lost her for good? The contract was gone, but so was the trust they'd built. Yet he couldn't give up. Nia carried their child somewhere out there, and he'd move heaven and earth to show her their love was real, not a transaction, not a mistake, but a promise he'd keep fighting for. James's search for Nia stretched into weeks of torment, each dead end a knife to his heart. The penthouse, stripped of her presence, echoed silently, mocking their briefly shared life. He'd severed ties with his parents, their legal threats now empty against his protected assets. But Nia remained a ghost. Private investigators scoured hospitals, shelters, and small towns. But she'd vanished, her pregnancy making every lost day feel like a betrayal. James worked relentlessly, his coding distracting from the fear that he'd lost her forever. The breakthrough came at 2:47 a.m. A call from Detective Sarah Chen, her voice crackling with urgency. "I found her," she said. "Pine Valley, upstate New York. She's working at a diner at Maggie's place and living in an upstairs room. But Mr. Sullivan, her pregnancy's been rough, high blood pressure, early contractions. She's due any day." Terror gripped James's chest. "Is she okay?" he asked, already grabbing his keys. "As of yesterday?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "But she's working double shifts to cover medical bills. You need to go now." James was in his car before the call ended. The GPS locked on Pine Valley, a 3-hour drive through pre-dawn darkness. His mind raced, replaying Nia's tearful departure, her plea for time. She was alone, struggling, and he'd failed to protect her. The thought of her in pain, carrying their child, drove him to push the speed limit, his hands tight on the wheel. Pine Valley was a postcard town, Victorian houses, quiet streets, where strangers drew stares. Maggie's place glowed warmly on Main Street, its neon sign promising pie and comfort. Through the window, James saw locals sipping coffee, but no Nia. His heart sank as he parked, gathering the courage to face what he might find. The diner's bell chimed as he entered, silencing the breakfast crowd. A woman in her 60s, gray hair tied back, approached with wary eyes. "Help you, hun?" she asked, her tone protective. "I'm looking for Nia Carter." "James," said, his voice rough from the drive. "I'm the father of her baby." The woman, Maggie, he assumed, studied him, her expression softening to pity. "You're him. The one she's been crying over." James's chest tightened. "She's upstairs, but she's been through hell. If you hurt her again, you'll answer to me." James nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He climbed the narrow staircase to apartment 2B, the hallway dim with the scent of coffee and bacon from below. The plain wooden door bore no trace of Nia's vibrancy. He raised his hand to knock, then froze at a low-pained moan from inside, followed by sharp gasps. His blood ran cold labor. Nia was in labor. Nia, he pounded on the door. It's James. Let me in. Go away, she gasped, her voice strained with pain. You can't be here. You're in labor, he said, trying the handle locked. You need help. I'm fine, she insisted, but a cry of agony cut her off. James didn't think. He threw his shoulder against the door, adrenaline splintering the cheap wood. He stumbled into a tiny studio, a futon, a hot plate, a life of bare necessity. Nia was on the floor, doubled over her face, pale and streaked with tears, her hands clutching her swollen belly. Nia, he breathed, dropping to his knees beside her. How long have you been like this? Since midnight, she whispered, gripping his hand as another contraction hit. James, I'm scared. Something's wrong. There's blood. He looked down, his world tilting at the sight of a towel soaked with blood, her skin grayish with distress. We need a hospital, he said, pulling out his phone to dial 911. You're bleeding too much. No hospital, Nia pleaded. I can't afford. I don't care about money. James cut in, his voice fierce. Our baby needs you to be safe. The 911 operator's calm questions, blood volume, contraction timing, only heightened his dread. 20 minutes for an ambulance, she said. Snowstorm is slowing everything down. James looked at Nia, her breathing shallow, and knew they didn't have 20 minutes. I'm delivering the baby. He told the operator, his voice steady despite his panic. Tell me what to do. Sir, are you trained? She asked. No, he said. But I'm not letting my family die. James followed the operator's instructions for 30 agonizing minutes, his hands shaking as he arranged towels and water. Nia gripped his fingers, her nails drawing blood, her cries tearing at him. I'm sorry, she gasped between contractions. I ran. I didn't trust us. Don't apologize, James said, stroking her damp curls. I failed you. I let them make me doubt you. But I'm here now. I love you, Nia whispered, tears mixing with pain. I never stopped. I love you too, he said, his tears falling. We're going to be a family. The paramedics burst in just as Nia's contractions peaked, their efficiency taking over. We're delivering here, the lead paramedic said, assessing Nia's condition. James held her hand, whispering encouragement as their son entered the world with a strong cry. He's perfect, Nia breathed, exhausted but radiant, as the paramedics placed the baby on her chest. James sobbed with relief, kissing her forehead as their son gripped his finger. Just like you, he said, his heart full. The paramedics stabilized Nia for transport, and as sirens wailed toward the hospital, James knew this moment bloody chaotic. Beautiful was the start of their real fight to build a life together, no matter the cost. The hospital room in Pine Valley was quiet, save for the soft beeps of monitors and the gentle breathing of the newborn cradled in James's arms. Nia lay in the bed, her face still pale from surgery, to repair the internal bleeding that had nearly taken her life during labor. The ordeal had been a blur, sirens, paramedics, the miraculous cry of their son Caleb as he entered the world. In the early morning light, James sat beside her, marveling at the tiny boy in his arms. 10 perfect fingers, clutching his own, a symbol of everything they'd fought for. Nia stirred her eyes, fluttering open to meet his. You're still here, she whispered, her voice weak but warm with wonder. Always, James said, leaning to kiss her forehead. Caleb slept peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling. Nia's gaze shifted to their son, a soft smile breaking through her exhaustion. We did it, she said. We're a family. James's heart swelled, but he saw the shadow in her eyes, the weight of their past. Nia, he said, his voice gentle. I know it's not that simple. Not after everything. She nodded her fingers, tracing the edge of the hospital blanket. When I left, I thought I was protecting myself, my mother, and our child. Your parents' words made me feel like a fraud, like my love was just a transaction. And then the pregnancy. I was terrified of being seen as the woman they accused me of being. You're not, James said fiercely. You're the strongest person I know. You faced all this alone, my doubt, their threats, the labor. I failed you, Nia, but I swear I'll spend my life making it right. Nia's eyes glistened, but her smile was steady. It wasn't just you. I ran instead of fighting for us. I let fear win too. She reached for his hand, her grip firm despite her weakness. But holding Caleb, seeing you here, it feels like we're getting a second chance. James lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. He said, I want to marry you, the words spilling out with quiet conviction. Not because of the contract, not because of Caleb, but because I can't imagine a day without you. Will you marry me, Nia? Her breath caught and silence hung between them for a moment, heavy with the past. James, she said, her voice trembling. I want that. But it's not just us anymore. There's Caleb, my mother, the world out there that won't always be kind to a family like ours. I need to know we're ready for that. He understood the weight of her words, the societal judgments, the whispers about their origins, the contract's lingering shadow. We'll face it together, he said. I've cut my parents out. Their money, their influence, it's gone. We'll build our own life wherever you want. Nia's smile softened, but doubt lingered. I love you, she said, but I need time to trust this fully, to trust us. Before James could respond, a knock at the door broke the moment. A woman entered, her presence vibrant, despite the hospital's sterility. Nia, she said, her voice warm. Aisha, Nia's friend from her graduate program, was a community organizer, with a fierce grin and braids swept into a high bun. I got here as fast as I could. Nia's face lit up. Aisha, you didn't have to come all this way. Like I'd miss meeting my godson. Aisha teased, her eyes softening as she saw Caleb. She turned to James, assessing him. You must be the famous James. Nia's told me a lot, good and evil. James nodded, accepting the scrutiny. I'm working on the good part, he said, earning a small smile from Aisha. She sat beside Nia, taking her hand. I've got news. A teaching position opening at a community college in Ithaca, focused on African American literature. I pulled some strings. They want you to apply. You and Caleb could start fresh there, away from all this drama. Nia's eyes widened, a spark of hope igniting. Ithaca, she murmured, glancing at James. It's a small town, quiet, suitable for raising a kid. James's heart lifted. I can work from anywhere, he said. My company's remote now. We could make it our home, Yumi, Caleb. An absolute beginning. Nia looked between him and Aisha, her expression softening. Yes, she said finally, her voice steady. Yes to the job. Yes to you, James. Yes to being your wife. James leaned down, kissing her gently, Caleb stirring between them. Aisha grinned, wiping a tear. About time you two figured it out. Now let me hold that baby. As Aisha cradled Caleb, James and Nia shared a look, their hands still joined. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, society's judgments, the echoes of their past, the challenges of parenthood, but they were ready. Nia's strength, her dreams of teaching, and James's newfound courage formed a foundation stronger than any contract. With Aisha's support and Caleb's tiny heartbeat anchoring them, they were a family built on love that had fought and won against all odds.